infrastructure.
A long campaign is now over.
This is the car market in Mogadishu.
NATO's military success against
many Western nations.
This is On Assignment.
Hey everybody, and welcome to On Assignment. I'm Alex Villarreal.
And I'm Philip Alexio. Coming up, 100 days have passed since Nigerian militant group Boko Haram kidnapped nearly 300 schoolgirls, and the attacks keep coming.
The death of Texas blues legend Johnny Winter saddens legions of fans. We'll look at the guitarist's contribution to popular music.
Speaking of Texas, that's where our radio program aimed at prison inmates is getting a lot of airplay.
And why using too much water in Southern California can get you in trouble with the law.
Don't go away. On Assignment starts right now. The kidnapping of nearly 300 girls from a school in Nigeria brought global attention to the extreme violence carried out by Islamic militant group Boko Haram. The group has said that it wants to create a strict Islamic state in northern Nigeria and has claimed responsibility for a number of deadly attacks to achieve that goal.
Human Rights Watch says Boko Haram has killed more than 2,000 civilians so far this year. The rights group says the militants carried out nearly 100 attacks from January through June. Ibrahim Ahmed of VOA's Hausa service has seen the destruction firsthand, having recently returned from Nigeria. And in this segment, he talks with me about his trip. While you were there,
Yes.
there were attacks. Tell us what you saw.
What you will see in the whole area is every town, every village you go to, in Borno State especially, you just see the burnt houses, the burnt schools, the destroyed cars, trucks, everything because of Boko Haram. And they almost kind of like attack at will. They attack with impunity. They'll go to a town and, they'll be attacking for like 9-10 hours, without any military assistance from outside, and they'll just do what they want to do and go away.
So being there and covering this story as a reporter, but in an area that is really your native home, what was that like for you?
It was kind of surreal, I would say. Initially, I know things are bad in the area because of the Boko Haram insurgency, but I didn't know it was really bad, very dangerous until this assignment, because people are living in fear. The whole parts of northeastern Nigeria, the whole of Borno State, some areas of Adamawa State, they are under siege, completely. People's lives have been destroyed. I've seen, I spoke with a refugee in Adamawa State who was shot twice in the head by Boko Haram militants. Miraculously he survived. I spoke with a woman who was in her home one day. They came knocking on the door. They took her husband. They killed him right in front of her. I have seen, there was a small boy, 16-year-old boy in Maiduguri, the Borno State capital, whose father was killed in a car bomb. The boy was in school. Now he had to quit school because he had other family members, and he's like the oldest guy in the house. Now he took over his father's kebab business, and lives have been destroyed.
You talked about highway dangers and the fact that a lot of people are being attacked by Boko Haram in their cars. Tell us about that.
All the highways that lead into Maiduguri, they're extremely dangerous now, because when Boko Haram was kicked out of the city, they went into the bushes, the forest around there, especially a very notorious forest called Sambisa, from where they have their bases currently. What they do now is they will come out and block the highway and attack people, mostly to steal, but then they come out and they also kill people just for the sake of killing people, especially if they stop vehicles and they find people from inside Maiduguri. They would say, oh, you chased us out of the city into the forest. They will kill them, and they will burn their cars or the trucks, and you know, that's what is happening.
Let's talk about that. Your time being there, how in danger did you feel?
Constantly while I was in Maiduguri, because after I started reporting and people knew I was there, I had to be changing where I sleep every single day. You know, I never sleep in the same place twice. You know, always have to change on a daily basis. And we went to Madagali, which is just across the border from Borno in Adamawa State. It's just about 150 kilometers from Maiduguri, which should take about an hour and few minutes because it's a big highway. But we had to drive for 2 days around through 5 states in order to get there.
All right, and our thanks again to Ibrahim Ahmed of VOA's Hausa service.
All right, time now for a short break, but when we come back, the music and legacy of Johnny Winter.
You're watching On Assignment.
Texas blues guitarist Johnny Winter passed away recently, just 2 days after his last concert of a European tour. He was soon to begin a U.S. tour celebrating his 70th birthday. Winter was also the subject of a documentary, Down and Dirty. Let's take a look.
How long have you been doing this, playing music and traveling?
Since I was 15. Made my first record when I was 15. Started playing clubs when I was 15. Started drinking and smoking when I was 15. Sex when I was 15. 15 was a big year for me.
When Johnny picks up a guitar, you never know quite what's going to come at you, but whatever it is, it's going to be good.
Joni! I love you, Joni!
He's a true bluesman. I don't know how many are left. I mean, of that caliber, you can count them on one hand, I think.
Did you ever imagine that loving the music that you love, playing the guitar and singing, that would carry you out into this world?
I was almost always sure it would.
Really?
I was sure I was going to be successful.
Well, he certainly ended up turning out to be very successful indeed. And joining me now is Catherine Cole to talk about Johnny Winter. But what made him so unique?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, first of all, the way he played, right? There are a lot of guitar players in the world, and there are a lot of people that say that they play the blues, but not a lot of people played the blues the way that Johnny Winter played them. I mean, you can pick up a guitar and say, I'm playing the blues. You can say you're playing a blues song. But to play the blues the way that Johnny Winter played the blues, you have to feel it inside. The blues come from within you. Then you can't deny the way he looked made him special. As he says, you know, it's obvious he's an albino. He's a very tall man. And at the peak of his career, he said, I want to look kind of different. So already he's looking kind of different as a tall albino man with long white hair. But the way he dressed was unique. He'd wear these jumpsuits with these long glam rock scarves and sometimes high-heeled boots. I mean, you knew when he was coming. There was nobody else that looked like him. So it was the whole package. I mean, he was an incredible player, and he had a look about him. There is only one Johnny Winter. There's also an Edgar Winter, who's also an incredible player who looks pretty cool, too. His brother. But there's only one Johnny Winter.
Well, he, I guess, was somebody who he started, as I understand, he played the clarinet and he played the ukulele, and then he worked his way into the guitar. And he also mentioned something about playing the blues where he said people didn't care what they thought about you, I guess, as a person. There was something about that he liked.
Yeah, I mean, he grew up, it was kind of sad. I mean, people made fun of him because of the way he looked when he was a kid. For him, yeah. I mean, when you're a little kid, you don't want anybody making fun of you, right, at school or anything. So he took solace in the songs and the music. And when he got a little bit older, he started gravitating towards that type of music. And when he went out to play it, nobody made fun of him.
Right. And he also played with obviously some pretty big names. What were some of
Well,
those, I guess?
Muddy Waters was one of his heroes when he was growing up, and Muddy Waters was one of the great Chicago blues players, and he grew up to produce several records for him, I think 4 or 5, and 3 of them won Grammys. So he did a pretty good job of producing those records.
Now, Rolling Stone named him, one of the top 100 blues guitarists?
Or guitarists, yeah.
Top guitarists
in the world.
Ever, is that
yeah,
right? Okay.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, there was an article in Rolling Stone, I think back in 1968, and this is what they said about him when they first interviewed him, I think 24 years old, and just tell me what you think. It's kind of what you were saying. It says, quote, "If you can imagine a 130-pound cross-eyed albino with long fleecy hair playing some of the gutsiest fluid blues guitar you ever heard, then enter Johnny Winter," and I think he was 24 back then.
Yeah, and that was probably about the time he got his first record deal, which was, you know, today it doesn't sound like huge money for a deal. It was $50,000 for 6 albums. Right. At the time, that was huge, especially for a 24-year-old.
Well, you know, the sad thing is, I mean, you and I have talked about, I think, Johnny Cash. We talked about George Jones. Now Johnny Winter. And these guys are all gone. But I guess, was he kind of like a Jimi Hendrix kind of thing in the blues, or since I don't know anything about music, do I not know what I'm talking about?
Well, I mean, Jimmy, in that he was a great performer and he was unique. Yeah, I mean, there's not anybody else that sounds like him or acts like him. And he's dead. So yes, he has all those things in common with Jimi Hendrix. But his output is a lot more. I mean, Johnny Winter worked for many, many years, so there's a lot more. If you're interested in finding out about him, you have a lot more to choose from. In fact, there was a big, I think 6 or 8 disc collection that came out a few years ago of a lot of his stuff. And then of course there's a new record coming out in just a few months that I think is a 2-disc set of duets of some of the songs that influenced him when he was growing up. So blues songs and rock songs with some wonderful performers. People like Dr. John is performing with him. I don't have the list in front of me, but I seem to remember maybe Eric Clapton is on that record. So some great people. And it was completed just a little while ago. And unfortunately, he's not going to be around to tour behind it. But he, you know, he was on tour when he passed away, and that's how every musician really wants to go.
All right, well, KC, Catherine Cole, everybody, and Johnny Winter lives forever through his music, as all musicians do. Thanks a lot. All right, on the other side of the break, water shortages in Southern California, and the man who makes sure residents are not overwatering their lawns. You're watching On Assignment.
Every Friday evening, prison inmates in and around Houston, Texas, tune into a radio program that was created with them in mind.
But as VOA's Greg Flakes tells me, the show has other audience members as well. Let's take a look at some of his report to begin with.
KPFT, may I have your name and where you're calling from?
A main feature of the weekly prison show is the call-in segment, where people can address their imprisoned loved ones.
Richard, I just want to say I love you, and my birthday's passed. I know your birthday's coming up too.
Many of the people working on the show are former convicts, including producer David Collingsworth, who first listened to it in a prison cell.
It showed me that somebody cared. Somebody was actually out there that cared.
Really appreciate it.
He says the show welcomes all callers, but there are often familiar voices on the line.
We can name all the regulars that call in, and we're a part of their lives.
Hey, Greg, how did the show get started? What was actually the inspiration behind it?
Well, a former convict from Texas prisons named Ray Hill started it in 1980, and it attracted an audience right away because there were a lot of prisoners at that time who had really no connection with their families, especially if the family lived far away from where the prison was. And at that time, they weren't allowed telephone privileges. So the radio show served as a sort of a connection between prisoners and their families. People could call into the show and give a message to whoever it might be in prison. In addition to the regular staff, the prison show counts on a number of expert guests who discuss subjects like prison health care, legal issues, and the death penalty. Attorney Bill Haburn informs listeners about civil and legal rights in the prison system.
We feed inmates information, and we feed families information.
The interesting thing is that they've also attracted an audience that goes beyond that community. They now have listeners not only around the United States on the internet, but also in 25 different countries.
Now, an ex-con started this, so is the show run by primarily ex-cons?
Yes, I would say so. Most of the people that are working on it, the producer, the on-air people, for the most part, are ex-convicts. And they, of course, bring a personal perspective to it. And as the producer told me, he became aware of the show when he was in prison, listening to it on his little transistor radio in his cell. The show sometimes features live music performed by former inmates like Dennis Price.
Well, now I'm locked away.
His experience emerges in many of his songs, but Price says he wants to move on.
I want to be a good person for my son, but it is a chapter in my life, and I've learned from it, and I think that it's made me who I am.
If you can imagine somebody who makes a mistake, ends up in prison, he's not necessarily a really terrible person. He's not, maybe an armed robber or something like that, but he's somebody who's made a mistake and he ends up in prison. He's terrified. He doesn't know what to do. He's out of his element. So having someone who can kind of give them some guidance and let them know that there's someone else out there who's thinking about them. Someone, they're not completely alone and isolated in the prison. There are people on the outside who do care about these issues.
VOA's Greg Flakus bringing prison radio to our attention. Well, coming up next, California is in the middle of a serious drought that has forced the state to reduce water to farmers.
Well, the effect is less severe in cities like Los Angeles, but residents there must still limit water waste, and authorities are pretty serious about water restrictions. VOA correspondent Mike O'Sullivan tells us about his recent ride with what can only be described as an LA water cop.
Rick Silva of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power cruises Los Angeles neighborhoods looking for signs of illegal watering.
Residential fines start at 100 and commercial fines start at 200.
Mike, tell us about this ride along you went on with the person that you described as a water cop.
Well, we had to get there very early in the morning. His name is Rick Silva, and initially he was the only water cop, enforcement officer basically with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. People water very early in the morning, typically 6:30, 7:30 in the morning. And so that's when he goes out to make sure they're watering when they should. Now, according to the ordinance, it's been in place for several years in LA. If you have an odd-numbered house address, you have to water Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Even numbers are Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. No one can water on Saturday.
And when you were on this ride along, did you see people who were watering on the wrong days, and how did Rick handle those situations?
Well, we did see sprinkler systems that were operating on the wrong days. We did see excessive runoff. And so Rick would pull over to the side of the road, get out of his car, and go over and take a picture. Take a picture of the runoff, take a picture of the sprinkler, take a picture of the house number. Then he would go back to his office later in the day and go into his database and send out an informational letter to these people. If they are repeat offenders, they'll be threatened with a fine, and eventually they will be fined.
So, Mike, the big question here, of course, is why these restrictions?
Well, we're going into the third year of a drought in California, and it's a drought that covers 100% of the state. In LA, for many years, we've had strict rules governing the use of indoor plumbing, low flush toilets and water efficient shower heads and faucets. And so that's pretty much covered. But where we waste a lot of water in LA is with irrigation. And about half of the water used in Los Angeles is for watering outdoor lawns. The city is urging homeowners to tear out their lawns and plant drought-resistant plants.
We will pay you to take out your grass. We'll pay you $3 a square foot.
Incentives have enticed some homeowners to put in plant varieties that are native to a temperate climate. The city has done this model landscaping in a public park.
see some of them are flowering now. It's pretty nice.
So Mike, you live in Los Angeles. You've lived there for a while now. What's been the response among people there? How do they feel about these restrictions?
Well, I have to say that an awful lot of people don't know about the restrictions, and I was not really clear on them as I went into this story. And a confession, I'm going to have to reset my own home sprinkler system as soon as I can figure out how it works, because I'm watering on some of the wrong days. And I think this is pretty common. I mean, I have mentioned this story to people, and they say there are restrictions. I didn't know about it. And so, I mean, the water district and the state water officials have a real job on their hands educating the public.
And now for our final story. The neurodevelopmental disorder known as autism comes with a mix of struggle, but also gifts. For some, autism brings a remarkable ability to handle complex tasks in language, math, and problem solving, but it also makes social interactions very challenging.
Over the last 50 years, the number of children diagnosed with autism has skyrocketed. To learn why, some scientists are focusing on a surprising link between behavior and physical health. Shelley Schlender has more from Boulder, Colorado.
Students at the Temple Grandin School in Boulder, Colorado are typical teenagers. They are also autistic. Parker says that has some benefits.
Asking thought process and problem solving, so creative ways to solve problems versus just your average person might just come up with basic ways to solve problems.
The downside includes being prone to digestive upsets and anxiety.
Socially, it's kind of harder to to talk to people and such, generally speaking.
Parker says a change in his diet improved his health and his mood.
I think I definitely got a little less grumpy all the time and less rigid and argumentative.
A growing number of researchers suspect that Parker's onto something. The California Institute of Technology scientist Sarkis Mazmanian suggests that what people eat affects the trillions of beneficial bacteria that live inside the digestive tract, including Bacteris fragilis.
Bacteris fragilis improves anxiety-like behavior, it improves repetitive behavior, it improves communication.
Mazmanian says that feeding that microbe to autistic mice improved their gut health and virtually eliminated their anxiety. He says there are far-reaching implications for humans with autism.
At least in a subset of autistic subjects, perhaps autism isn't solely a disease of the brain, but perhaps that the issues in the gut are contributing to autistic behavior. And if you can address the gastrointestinal symptoms, that you could have improvements in behavior.
At Arizona State University, Rosa Kralsmanik-Brown is finding similar clues in human studies of autism.
We were looking to see if these kids are missing good microbes, and that's what we found.
Her lab has documented that children with autism tend to have a less diverse population of gut microbes than a typical child. Her colleagues suspect modern practices, including processed foods and overuse of antibiotics.
One of the major differences in medical histories of children with autism is that they've received 2 to 3 times as many oral antibiotics as typical children.
All these researchers agree there's much more to solving the puzzle linking digestion, microbes, and autism, but they believe they are on a promising path, and their discoveries might also help with other mood disorders, including depression and schizophrenia. For VOA News, I'm Shelley Schlender.
All right, well, that is our program for this week, but remember, you can always find our show on voanews.com.
All right, we're going to close out our show this week a little differently. A bit of music from Johnny Winter. So thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next week.